Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another segment of our mental health moment. My name is Linda Gallick. I'm the health and well-being consultant at Bellin Health, and so happy to be joined by two licensed behavior health therapists today. Really excited for what we're going to bring you today. So we're continuing our discussion that we started last segment on addiction. And so, as always, we have our behavioral health therapist, Charles Latour, here. Charles, how's your day going?
It's going very good. Thank you, and hopefully you too.
Yes, very well. And then our special guest today, so happy to welcome Sarah Long. And Sarah is one of our outpatient mental health and AODA therapists, and she is here to share some additional information. So welcome, Sarah.
Hello.
Thanks for taking the time. So just want to recap where we went with our last segment, and we'll be building on that information. So on our last segment, we really started to dive into the idea of addiction in our community, the challenges that brings, what's going on in our community. We had Mandy Southers on from the Darjun Foundation. Mandy was very transparent in sharing her own story, and I think we learned a lot from her. But Charles, what did we really learn in that last session that we're going to be building on today?
I think a number of different things. I think for one thing, first of all, I guess if we even start building on what you just said with Mandy, she was very transparent, very open about her journey. So we heard a journey, we heard a path, we heard a narrative. We heard a very personal experience of somebody going from a very difficult part in her life to the point that essentially in court for issues that easily, to her description, could have been 6 years in prison or longer. And we heard of a story of a judge who believed in her more than she believed in herself, and his, let's call it leniency or belief, led to her saying that this isn't a chance I want to mess up, and it gave her even more focused dedication to her pathway of recovery. So I think there's the external belief, the internal belief, who does believe in me, and what is that going to be? Can I use that as a springboard to my own path to recovery? And we heard just that. And we also heard from her, unfortunately, some very difficult news of some people who didn't necessarily have the same pathway towards recovery, and some tragic incidents that she has been aware of in her work along the way getting there. So I think we heard a lot of information, a lot of story with regard, in a very transparent way, of stories of success, but some that weren't nearly, unfortunately, as successful. So I found it to be a really interesting meeting and presentation. And again, I hope her vulnerability and transparency were things that people related to, and maybe not even for themselves, but for other people in their lives. So that's some of what my takeaway from our last meeting was.
Yeah, and I think that it's always really, really powerful when we hear somebody's personal experience and they're willing to be vulnerable and they're willing to talk about something that's really difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I think that Mandy did such a great job, and we can't thank her enough. So today we're going to continue the discussion on addiction, and we're so pleased to have Sarah here. And Sarah is going to share with us a little bit about treatment and how Bellin does treatment in terms of addiction. So Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I just have a little PowerPoint here that kind of explains the different levels of treatment that we have at Bellin. If you go to the next slide, that's just an introduction to the 5 of us on our team. So we are all duly licensed. We specialize in mental health as well as addiction services. and we all do a different level of treatment. All of us, at the end of the day, we all do individual treatment as well, but then there's the different levels that I'll be explaining that all of us kind of take and run with. So if you go to the next slide, that begins so the lowest level is called early intervention. And this is a program that is individual therapy sessions that are either 20 or 25 minutes or 40 to 50-minute sessions. And the purpose of this program is to build insight into the problematic patterns that are associated with that substance use in order to decrease the likelihood of any unwanted outcomes associated or substance use reoccurring in the future. So like the legal issues, family concerns, a lot of those things. We're trying to, at that point, meet them at the lowest level and try to avoid some of those things from happening. This program was initially created to support and gently challenge individuals in the pre-contemplation and contemplation stage of change to build insight and motivation for positive change to occur in the future. The program is 4 to 6 individual therapy sessions depending on the length of the session that the individual chooses and how quickly that individual can process through the material that is presented. And then, if they continue to struggle with that level of care, then they can transition to a higher level of care that we offer too. And then if you want to go to the next slide. So we're kind of jumping around a little bit. So the early intervention is the lowest level. And then our highest level that we have is our integrated substance use disorder treatment program. And it will kind of make sense why I did the lowest to the highest once I get to the next ones. But this program, we call it ISTP for short. It is group as well as individual therapy over the course of 6 weeks. So the individual will meet with group on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, and then they will also have so that's for 2 hours each time, so 4 hours of group each week, and then they will also have an individual therapy session that is a 1-hour session each week on a non-group day, so a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. And the purpose of this program is to build, but it's to build some crisis skills and as well as emotion regulation skills that can help them with their substance use. This is for the action stage of change, and it's also for individuals that can have additional support when they have that individual therapy, so they can benefit from that, those multiple points of contact on a weekly basis, and then dive, more into some of their issues in the individual session as well. After this is our aftercare programming and or relapse prevention. So the next slide is aftercare, and that is a continuation of the ISTP. So that is a 12-week program that meets for a group on Tuesday mornings once a week, so 2 hours for 12 weeks. And this is to, refine those skills that they learn in the ISTP, the distress tolerance skills, enhance those interpersonal effectiveness skills, improve their emotion regulation, and then increase their self-confidence in their recovery as well. In this program, they also learn mindfulness techniques, and they learn about all of the neurobiological changes that the brain has, and then, that's to help them enhance their healing. And it helps, they get the peer support as well so that they can continue growing in there too. And then after that, so relapse prevention can be after that, or it can be one of those groups that they just jump right into, which I'll kind of get into the assessment process later. But if we're assessing them and they've been sober for a couple weeks to a month, then we would put them right into the relapse prevention. And what relapse prevention includes is a 16-week program. They meet 2 hours a week for 16 weeks for a group, and this is for just to kind of learn how to build the skills around preventing relapse. So changing their social skills, just overall building that healthy lifestyle and learning how to, again, use those distress tolerance and emotion regulation skills to prevent relapse in the future. If you want to go to the next slide. So this kind of talks about the referral process that I was talking about. So people can contact Bellin either via a self-referral or, we've got a lot of people that are already working with a therapist or a psychiatrist, and then they get referred from them. And at that point, what we do is we sit down with them for an hour session and we go over their entire life, figure out, what's going on, where are substances kind of interfering with their life, and then we talk about the appropriate level of care. So at that assessment, as well as any treatment transition, so whether they're completing the ISTP or they're doing individual sessions and they need more, we always do what's called the ASAM. And the ASAM is a form that we fill out that assesses the different dimensions of a person. So any acute withdrawal or intoxication potential, are there any biomedical complications, are there any emotional, behavioral, or cognitive conditions, are they ready to change, is there any relapse potential going on, and then we also look at, is their recovery or living environment helpful or is it harming them? So we always try to work to meet the individuals where they're at, but of course, using our expertise, then we would say, this is kind of what we would recommend. What are you thinking? Would you do a group? Would you rather do individual sessions? We let them ultimately decide what would best benefit them, but of course, using our knowledge to share with them what the best treatment option would be. And like I said, they're kind of, it's an ever ongoing process. So if somebody starts out in early intervention and they need more, then they can always go to that ISTP or relapse prevention. And it's kind of just always meeting them where they're at in order to best facilitate their recovery. And that's all I have. Sorry, I talk really fast.
Oh, that was really great, Sarah, and really appreciate that. That's really fascinating to hear all of that and hear the different encompassing pieces that really surround somebody. There's another question in the chat. If they are not ready for a program, when do you assess for readiness? Do they not get into the program?
Well, we have kind of, it's like a revolving door policy. So if let's say I met with somebody today that wasn't necessarily ready, I say that to them, we've got this ISTP program. It's something that I think you would really benefit from, but they're not really ready for it. Then I will meet with them individually until they are, and then they can get into that program. It's always, like I said, a revolving door. There's always openings coming up. So we just kind of assess them at every single session, really, to see if they're ready.
Awesome. So, a question I have for you, Sarah, and for Charles is really, from the approach, because I see a really all-encompassing, treatment plan that's coming with a lot of different tools and a lot of different stages and approaching that patient, in a couple different ways. Why is that so important for this kind of, rehabilitation?
Well, everybody's so different. So, it can't be a cookie cutter definition of treatment. And we tell people that too, is, when you're in group with somebody, everybody's on a different path. So what you're going through is different than what they're going through. So what their treatment plan is going to be is different than what your treatment plan is going to be. So we always tell people, not to compare yourselves to other people. But yeah, we just try to, like I said, we don't have that cookie cutter. Everybody's so different. So we just try to meet that person where they're at and try to be as understanding and compassionate as we can.
Charles, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought is I totally agree with Sarah. Even what I was talking about with the story from the last meeting was the uniqueness of everybody's path is exactly that, a unique path. It's a really interesting thing in the recovery world in the sense that there's this fairly well-known and established pathway of treatment, but everybody goes through it different. And everybody's starting line is a little bit different. And I'm going to go back to something Sarah was mentioning that I'd like to double click on because it was so important, and it's the starting line. And what she was talking about pre-contemplation and contemplation is that everybody starts this at a certain point and they go through it, but everybody's experience of it is different. And the reason I think that's so important is this. There's this saying in the addiction world is sometimes you don't even know you're addicted until you try to stop something, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody's starting point is different. Everybody's level of awareness is different. When you should have got help compared to when you did. There's that great saying, which was, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. So what I find in that pre-contemplation to contemplation, where someone finally decides they're going to do it is, and Sarah, I'm really curious your perspective too, is there's a certain amount of pain that has been created for you and your family or loved ones or work or whatever, that a certain amount of pain has developed that I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to have to do something. And that takes us from pre-contemplation to contemplation to then working on starting action. And what Sarah just went through is the process of action of that taking place. And when I first heard her and the rest of her team go through it, I thought at some point I'd like everybody to hear that, because just about everybody that we know in that 6 degrees of separation, somewhere in life, somewhere there's somebody struggling with something in the way of an addiction that this process can be helpful to. And everybody who goes through it will go through it a little bit differently. And that's what it all comes down to, but they will make it work for them. So there's one other thing I want to say, and I'm so happy Sarah captured the aftercare portion of it, because in my experience in working with people with addictions, there's this thing where the safety of the treatment program is amazing. And it takes that, the safety, the trust, the comfort to go into some of these things that have been, whether they've been inner demons, things I've been trying to escape, that alcohol or drugs or whatever else was the escape. But once they leave the program, the next part of the journey begins. And what is the aftercare? And the greater the aftercare and the greater commitment that people have sticking with it adds to the greater recovery process and longevity of abstinence from whatever it is that they're dealing with. So aftercare is as important a part of the treatment as the treatment process itself. So thank you again, Sarah, for covering that.
You know, another thing that you said, Charles, that made me think about something I wanted to bring up too, when you said the 6 degrees of separation, and probably everybody is, if they're not dealing with an addiction themselves, they may very well be connected to someone that they care about that is struggling with an addiction. And I think that, you know, one of the things we wanted to bring up in this session is the idea that you can get some help too. Like, you don't need to struggle with this pain in your life without getting some assistance and reaching out and connecting as well. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Sarah, you want to go first?
Yeah. You know, the addiction process affects everybody in the family, you know, and so I work with individuals that are family members of somebody dealing with addiction, and it's, you know, it's really hard to come to grasp, to trust them, you know, like you said before, there's some pain that had happened, you know, whether it be the lying, the legal issues, just so many different things that could come, and there's a lot of pain, and working towards trusting that person again is huge. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And the working with family, and that's why programs like Al-Anon, for example, are so important and so helpful. Um, there's sometimes I have seen, and Sarah, curious for you on your end, I'm sure there's some overlap with this, but there's times that I'm working with people, family members, and they're not the one with the addiction, but they feel they are as affected by the person with the addiction, and sometimes the hopelessness that comes from, I think he or she needs help, so and so thinks he or she needs help, everyone thinks this person needs help, but the person who does need the help, and the family's going through that feeling of hopelessness, and I feel like there's nothing I can do, is one of the most difficult things in the world to go through. And one of the some of Sarah's content, the pre-contemplation contemplation, comes from a book and an author. His name is James Prochaska. He tells this unbelievable story that got him into the treatment world, which is, I was at this conference with him years ago. He was presenting, and he was telling his story about how he came to do what he did. And he said, a long time ago, I was talking with this man who wouldn't quit drinking and wouldn't quit smoking. Wouldn't quit drinking, wouldn't quit smoking. No matter what anybody said, no matter what anybody did, no matter how much people pleaded with him to stop what he was doing because it was killing him, he wouldn't listen to anybody. And he wound up dying from alcohol and cigarettes. And he was telling his story, and he said, that person was my father. And I realized at that time, I needed to understand the addiction process better, and why it is that somebody can do what they're doing up to the point that it can kill them, but they would rather keep doing what they're addicted to than living. And he wound up writing this book called Changing for Good, the Trans-Theoretical Stages of Change, where that process comes from. But it's just amazing that family members see these things happening, and the effect on them and the toll that is exacted on them is absolutely amazing. And like I said, I wind up working, because I'm not necessarily an addiction specialist, but working with families of those who have someone with addiction in their family. So it's just one of the most difficult things to see family members go through, feeling the helplessness of not being able to help. So, which is why I'm so happy there's people like Sarah and her team out there to help the people who do struggle with the addictions.
So Sid had chatted in. I think it's important to point out that what might have worked for an addict before might not work the next time after relapse. Family and friends need to be educated on the process as well. And then Elizabeth chatted in, do you have any family resources available? Thoughts on that?
So we do, I don't know if all of the therapists do this, but family is definitely welcome to come to any of those individual therapy sessions to kind of, see what goes on in the therapy session, to address any of their concerns, and, like Sid said, to be educated on what's going on. But other than that, like there's the Al-Anon. I don't know if any other places have like a family program, like, because I know Hazleton has a family program, but I don't know if there's anything in the area that specifically does that anymore.
Charles, anything else that you want to share on that?
No, individual or family therapy, working, even if it isn't with the impacted person, the whole family's impacted. Anytime you could do anything individual or with family, it's going to be a help. But the most well respected, well recognized, is exactly what Sarah said. Al-Anon, the people that I've known who've utilized that service, it is absolutely amazing. Because kind of in the treatment world, and maybe one other thing I do want to tie into this is there's something incredibly healing about people who are going through some similar experiences, who feel like you feel like they're walking in your shoes and you're walking a little bit in theirs. The things that come out of those meetings are absolutely unbelievable. How people feel heard, understood, appreciated, and to be able to see that, oh my gosh, at this moment in time, I am not the only person struggling with what I'm dealing with. So that type of connection from those meetings are so helpful. And oftentimes it can help you chart a path of your own recovery, of how you're going to deal with how you've been impacted by the person who has the addiction. So couldn't emphasize that strongly enough.
Awesome. Thanks for all of that. I just want to open it up. If anyone has additional thoughts or questions, for Sarah or Charles, please go ahead and put those in the chat. I feel like we've covered it pretty well as far as treatment options, but was there anything else that either one of you wanted to share? Anything else that comes to mind? If somebody is out there and they know somebody with an addiction or they have a family member, any other words of wisdom for them? Sarah, I'll start with you.
As far as other options out there, I think the best thing is just, to get the family member connected with one of us or any other place in the community as well, because then they can assess and see what's going on. And at that point, if even residential treatment is something that the person would benefit from, then that can be discussed at that time. Or if they need like an inpatient detox before they do treatment, that can be discussed too. So, the biggest thing would just to be connected with one of the professionals in the community to kind of learn what the options are and what the best path would be to take. And, like Charles was saying too, make sure you get the support for yourself too, because it definitely impacts you.
Oh, Charles, you're muted.
Okay, this whole program kind of has reminded me of something. When I was a fresh out of college, graduate, I worked in this very great, amazing treatment facility, written up in Time, I think Newsweek as well, for how prestigious it was and how even world-class athletes went there for their recovery. And, it really gave me a tremendous understanding of the difference between what you know out of a book and what you know out of life. And the most respected therapists and counselors there were the ones who had been through their own treatment and own recovery. And I was meeting with one person and they were extolling the virtues of this one clinician. And I said, yeah, he's so unbelievable. Coolest guy, knows everything. What works for you better than anything else? And his comment was, everything that I could have done with respect to my addiction, he has already done. So it's like a chess game that he's always one step ahead of me because he already did it. And it's just waiting to see if I'll do it too. So I can never trick him. I can never fool him. I can never, back then the word for it was con. I can't con my way out of this program. So I might as well work the program. So I'm saying that for a couple of reasons. One is, in the world of addictions, your secret of what you're trying to escape, until you're in touch with that, you're probably conning yourself in the program. But once you're really there with it, is I don't want to do that anymore. I really want the recovery more than to get through it and perpetuate my addiction. And that depth of honesty, that look that you have to do, requires so much trust in the program. And that's what this offers, what Sarah's offering. And I can tell you, as the recipient of people who come from that and then want to work individually further on that, is the level of honesty they have got to work through those issues, finally face what was maybe behind some of the addiction. It's an incredible process. And one person described it, and this is maybe my favorite description of all of it, is when people get to that point, it's the closest thing to a miracle that you could possibly see, is that depth of honesty with yourself to really work through the program and make the most out of that opportunity. And there are times where it doesn't. I mean, there's people who have to go through treatment once or twice, sometimes a different kind of treatment altogether, or sometimes just more of this to go deeper with it. But back to where we started, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's journey is a little bit different, but those who work it have the best opportunity for abstinence long past the course of treatment. Can I say one other thing, Linda, before you jump in?
Absolutely.
There's one other thing that I just thought of that this person back then had said. It stayed with me my whole life, because this is like a while ago. But the person had said, I was talking with a clinician, and like, you know, you were so great. You know, he had been sober for over 10 years, no drinking, no alcohol, no drugs, nothing. And he said this statement to me that I'll never forget as long as I live, which is, like, because I was asking him how he works his program. He said, yeah, I work it every day. You have to. And I said, yeah, but you've been sober for 10 years. And he said, yeah, you know what, though? Here's the deal. No matter how far and when you're in the world of addictions, no matter how far you drive away from it, you're still only 15 yards from the ditch you were in. That's what it is. Like, you're always still working the program, always still working your recovery, and there's always strength in that recovery because you never want to go back into that. And again, I think I'll never forget that.
That is so poignant, and I think it speaks to just sometimes how we're wired as human beings, and that really leads into a beautiful segue for what we're planning for our next segment. We're going to continue that discussion on addiction, but we're really going to look at behaviors. We're going to look at behaviors that we're addicted to, and that can be anything from eating Oreos to maybe an overzealous need to exercise. I mean, it really can run the gamut, but I think it's always that fine line of we're never really far away from it. So I think that's a really, really great reminder. So someone had commented in, they love the question, what is your secret that you're trying to escape? And then Maureen had commented, that question also works for anxiety, not just addiction. So,
yes.
Really great discussion there. All right. Well, we're kind of wrapping up here. If anyone has additional questions for Sarah or Charles, please put those in the chat. Otherwise, I'd love to get your parting thoughts, kind of how you would summarize today, and any thoughts just kind of moving forward. So Sarah, I'll start with you.
Well, I guess to summarize today, I would just say, you know, there's always an option for somebody. You never have to do it alone, whether you are the person who's struggling with substance use or you are the family member or friend. You never have to go through it alone. There is something out there for you. There's help somewhere, whether it be professional help or a support group. There's a lot of things like on Facebook, like social media as well. If people are not, are hesitant to do the group thing or the therapy thing. There's a lot of groups out there on social media that are really helpful too. But I guess that's my biggest takeaway is you're never alone. And as far as treatment, we always try to meet you where you're at and do the best that we can to help you facilitate your growth, whatever direction that you want that to be.
Thank you, Sarah. A big part of our program is really, that's what we always want you to know at the end of the day is you're not alone. There are options, to deal with these things. And we want you to know that those connections and those resources are out there for you. Charles, your thoughts to wrap us up?
Yeah, a couple things. Before I go into them, first of all, Sarah, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy week and to do this. And I was so excited for you to do it once I heard that program at one of our quarterly therapist meetings and how revealing and helpful it was. And also emphasizing how individualized it is, meeting people where they're at and then taking them on their journey for that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. The other thing I want to do is tying back into something I was talking about last time is anybody can have this. This isn't like there was this time that addictions was thought of as those people who are sleeping under bridges somewhere, but we have to know that it isn't just those people. It's anybody, because addictions start with this thing in our lives that I talked about last time, which was this pleasure and pain reward system in our body that shares the same part of our brain. And most people turn into addictive lifestyles chasing this pleasure and avoiding pain. But as Anna Lemke says, and I'll read this quote, the relentless pursuit of pleasure and avoiding pain is what leads to pain. So we have to be more about our balance rather than always seeking this pleasure, because that reward system is always back and forth, and every living system is the system that ultimately is seeking equilibrium. And just this week, I'll end with this thought. Several people have told me that since they've been abstinent from alcohol and or drugs, they've been able to experience moments in their lives that they never would have experienced if they were high. And when we're seeking pleasure through these mechanisms or substances, we're really actually going closer to pain than to pleasure, because those greatest moments of pleasure come from natural events rather than the substances that we're using. So if anybody is out there echoing what Sarah just said and underscoring it, because she said it so nicely and eloquently, you're not alone. Getting help, taking that first step, whether it's you for you or you for someone else, taking that first step is the pathway to help. And anything that we can do to help, that's what we're here for. So thank you.
Well, thank you to you, Charles, and thank you, Sarah. Thanks to both of you for just bringing your expertise today to this topic and giving us so much great information and really connection points to think about. And just a reminder to everyone, we are accessible at Bellin, so please reach out to us if you do need us to connect you to someone. We would certainly be happy to do that, and we definitely want to, be reaching people in our community for the better health and well-being of all involved. So thanks again to all of you for joining us today. Again, we're going to do part 3 next month. So that'll be our topic in March. We're going to look at addictive behaviors. So we hope that we get to see all of you then. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.